Well, hello everyone, it's Mary. Today I'm bringing you my January and February wrap-up. I did not upload a wrap-up in January just because I read only 3 books. One of them was the 5th book in the Outlander series, and I just didn't think it was going to be an interesting video. Anyway, I'll talk about 3 books first that I want to just briefly touch upon. The first one is The Fiery Cross by Diana Gabaldon, which is the 5th book in the Outlander series, and I finally finished it after actually having it on hold for 2 years. It's a pretty long and dense book. I'm obviously not going to talk about the plot of this one since it's the 5th installment, but I will say, if you are not familiar with Outlander, that this is a historical fiction slash fantasy and slash romance, I would say. It follows Claire. She was a military nurse during the Second World War, and after the war she and her husband decide to go for their second honeymoon to Scotland. Her husband is a historian and wants to follow the path of his ancestors there in Scotland, while she is interested in plants and herbs for medical purpose. While she's there, she gets quite interested in the folklore of the country. She basically gets transported back in the 1700s. Things unfold from there. I did not really enjoy this book. I gave it 3 stars, but it's more like a 2.5 or 7 stars, just because I don't think it ruined the story or the characters. It just was very boring and very unbalanced. Yeah, I will not talk about this book anyway, because I'm just going to do a full review when I finish the series. Another book that I won't talk about that much is Next by Alessandro Baricco. He is an Italian author, and this is a very short book on globalization. It's actually a collection of 3 newspaper articles that he wrote back in 2001 on globalization. I think it was mildly interesting, but nothing too groundbreaking. I gave it 3 stars, but I would say it's just nah. Then we have a book that was never translated into English, and is a short story collection by Stefano Benni, which would be translated as God's Grammar, I guess. I really did not enjoy this book that much. I gave it 2 stars just because most of the short stories that I read were not good, in my opinion. Some of them were actually annoying, very depressing and just bitter, but not in a very clever way, I would say. I mean, I know the author is very clever, and I actually love his writing style. And 2 stories I gave 5 stars, and then there was one story which I gave 4 stars, and those were brilliant, amazing, but just the rest of them were not quite as good as those 3 stories. And I feel like his older works might be better than this one, but as I said, I see no point in talking about this book, which you guys could not even read if you wanted to. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one. I just don't think I will give this book away, because those 3 stories really stood up, and I actually read all 3 of them at least 2 times already, because I love them so much. So I will keep this book eventually, but I'm sad that I couldn't give it a higher rating. Then I reread Salamander by Thomas Wharton, which was a huge disappointment for me, because I remember being so fond of this book when I was a teenager. And actually I remember being blown away by it, which obviously did not happen this time around. And I don't know if it was just not the right mindset to be reading this book for me, but it just didn't work at all. And halfway through I was completely uninterested in the events or the characters, and I had to push myself to finish this book. And it took me forever to read, which is weird because it's not a long book. I thought this book was very confusing. I don't know if it's actually the format of the book, because this is not the edition that I reread. The first time I read it, it was in Italian, so it was a completely different edition. And then I bought this book in English because I wanted to be able to read it in its original language. But the copy that I got was very hard to read because I think the print went off a bit. It was like all smudged. There were no like quotation marks, and that was very confusing. So while I was reading that book, I actually purchased this used copy, which as I flicked through has quotation marks and is very well printed and everything. So maybe, I don't know, just maybe that was part of the confusion. So this book is set in the 18th century and it follows Nicholas Flood, who is a printer, and he gets summoned by an eccentric Slovakian count who lives in a very weird castle. He has the quite impossible task to create and print the infinite book. It has some elements of steampunk, adventure, I guess kind of fantasy as well. And it is a book about books, which is always something that I really appreciate. The first part of the novel was executed pretty well, in my opinion, but it just gets lost from there. It just was so hard for me to get into the story. I gave it 3 stars out of fun, mostly because I couldn't bring myself to give it a lower rating, but actually it deserves maybe 1 star or 2 stars. And I'm actually curious to revisit the book and just read it at some point in my life. Given that I have this better edition, maybe it can work better, I don't know. Definitely what I'm sure it will not change is the lack of character development. The characters were absolutely flat. I did not feel any emotions towards them. I then read Lord of the Flies by William Golding. A plane crashes on a desert island and the only survivors are a group of young boys from the UK who start together and they try to form some sort of society, electing a leader to actually give themselves some rules while they're waiting to be rescued. We follow the story mainly through the main protagonist point of view, who is Ralph. He is the leader of the group, but we also get to follow, I think, at least another viewpoint of one of the boys. I really enjoyed this book while it took me some time to actually get into the story at first, but once I got sucked in, I couldn't stop reading, and I actually was, I think at some point I was kind of sweating to the point where I had to put the book down and just take a deep breath and continue on with the reading because I was so into it. This book touches very important themes and you can see how it is heavily influenced by the war that just finished, which left some sort of, pessimism and just bitterness in general. A dehumanized society with no space for hope and forgiveness. The novel is written in the form of an allegory, which I thought was very well executed and explores really the dark side of humanity and its natural inclination towards violence and evil. I don't think it's casual that it chose kids to portray this kind of society. Although I would say it is not 100% pessimistic. It has some characters that really go through a journey and a development which is impressive given their age. I give it 4 stars. I would definitely recommend checking this out. Next, I read The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, which was so good. This is the first Sarah Waters book that I've ever read, and I see her talked a lot around BookTube, and I was so curious to check one of her book out, even though the premise of this book seemed really scary to me. I don't really like scary books or like horror books, anything that's creepy. I get so easily scared that I thought this one was maybe not for me, and that's why I put off the reading of this book for so long. But actually it was, in this aspect, it was very good in dealing with creepiness, which was never too much for me to handle. This is set after the Second World War in Warwickshire, England, and it follows Dr. Faraday, who is called to attend a sermon in hundreds hall, property of the Aries family for generations. This big house was once very well known and respected, but it's now in decline, and its owners seem to be in a similar state. We follow the story through Dr. Faraday's point of view as his story gets intertwined with the story of the Aries family. And yeah, I don't really want to give too much away, because what this book does very well is to slowly build up the mysteries that surround this big mansion. I really enjoyed this book, and one thing that really stands out, I think, it's her writing style, which is brilliant, and there was not a single time in which I was not interested in what she was describing. It was not necessarily fast-paced, but just so interesting and compelling to read. The only reason why I did not give this book 5 stars, it's because towards the end she kind of gives the ending away a little bit, I guess. I think it's part of the construction of the story, but it's just something that I would have loved to be more surprised about, I guess. But anyway, I'm definitely going to pick up more books by her. I'm thinking the next one that I want to get my hands on is Fingersmith. But if you guys have any other suggestions, I would love for you to just comment down below and tell me. Possibly nothing too creepy for me, because sometimes I had some chills reading this one, although I managed to get through it. And the last book that I will talk about is a graphic novel, and it's The Complete Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. I completely adored this book. I thought it was so clever and so interesting. It's all in black and white, and the art style is very simple. As you can see, this is actually a memoir and a coming-of-age story of the author herself, Marjane, who spent her childhood in Iran and in Tehran. And after the Islamic Revolution, she had to move to Austria. Is that how you pronounce it? I think so. To Austria to be in a safer environment. It's very bitter, very funny, and very informative. It just really stirred something inside me, which tells me to get informed on cultures that are different than my own and that I know nothing about. I shamefully admit that I did not know anything about Iran or the Islamic Revolution, and I don't know a lot of other things about an awful lot of other countries. And I had some weird projects when I was younger that I wanted to read the history of every country, which might be a little bit too ambitious, but actually if I start from somewhere, I think I can still do it. This really made me think a lot, and I decided to buy other books regarding Iran in particular, and then, you know, move on to other countries. I don't know actually why I didn't give this book 5 stars, but I just think if you have to think about whether or not giving a book 5 stars, then maybe it doesn't deserve 5 stars for you. When I read a 5-star book, I'm like, wow, I just have to give this book 5 stars. And here I was like, I really enjoyed this book, but should I give this book 5 stars? And then just because I asked that to myself, I gave it 4 stars. But anyway, I really enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend you checking this out. Okay, this was very long, and I'm never ever going to put 2 wrap-ups together in one. I'm really bad at wrap-ups. I should probably just bring back some of the reviews, which I adore doing. Just, you know, single reviews of one book, especially because my thoughts are just everywhere, and this will take me ages to edit. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as usual, let me know in the comments down below if you read any of the books that I mentioned, and if you suggest me picking up some books based on what I liked, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!